Mrs. Global Order, I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm absolutely delighted that an old friend of India, Ambassador Mark Sofer, has joined me from Tel Aviv today. The ambassador, of course, apart from being a distinguished Israeli diplomat, knows India really well, having served in the country. I want to talk to the ambassador about a whole range of issues, beginning, of course, with what's going on with the war in Gaza and many other questions. Thank you, Ambassador, for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Just one correction, if I might. I'm not a current ambassador. In fact, I'm retired from the foreign ministry, which is important to mention because you won't be hearing from me many compliments about the current Israeli government, which if I were a current ambassador, I would probably not be able to say them.
That's right. I meant you have had a distinguished history and career as a diplomat.
That's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Wonderful. Let me begin, Ambassador, by asking you a question which many people are asking. Does the war in Gaza have a designated end point? Because this has dragged on for a long, long time. And in a sense, as the days go by, it seems to be getting more difficult, may I say, not just for, of course, people who are still in Gaza, but also for the state of Israel.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Hindol. I will be open with you here. If it does have a defined aim, which the government has thrown something out to the effect that we won't wait until it'll be over when Hamas is totally eradicated, this isn't a defined aim. This is some sort of amorphous goal which will never actually happen. And so perhaps the bottom line is that, no, it doesn't have a defined aim. As far as the majority of the population of Israel is concerned, number one on the list has to be the return of the hostages. They've been languishing in tunnels and in the dirt and mud for over 600 days. And clearly the activity of the military is not getting them out. What is getting them out is agreement through Qatar, through Egypt, with the help of the United States. But not only Hamas, or Hamas, a terrorist organization, I don't expect too much from them, but from our side as well, we seem to be putting more of an emphasis, unfortunately, on the military aspects of it and defeating Hamas militarily than we are on other aims, such as what will be in Gaza in the post-war, the day after, as it were, who will control it, and many, many other questions which the government doesn't seem to be asking, probably for internal reasons connected to the sustenance of the coalition.
Let me ask you also, after that dastardly attack on young Israeli diplomats in Washington as they were coming out of an AJC meeting, young diplomats who, by all counts, in their work and in their personal life, had hoped to build bridges and not, in a sense, create more animosity. After those terrible attacks and the murders of those two young Israeli diplomats, what impact has it had on the mood in the people, among the people in Israel and among Jews around the world about how this conflict is progressing?
Well, first of all, just a small correction. It's not a very important one, of course, because in the final aim, 2 people were killed, but they weren't actually diplomats. They were staffers or they were working at the Israeli embassy. And as far as, to the best of my knowledge, they weren't even Israeli citizens. But I think what you saw here was a blatant anti-Semitic attack, the conflation of Jews around the world with the state of Israel, which doesn't happen anywhere else. I mean, would anyone seriously go around killing Indians because they don't like the Indian proposition of the position on Kashmir? It's unbelievable that people do that, but yet there are anti-Semites everywhere, and this was yet another anti-Semitic attack. So I think it's a very intricate and delicate question here. There are many anti-Semites in the world. And but I don't believe that we should look at every criticism of an Israeli government action as being anti-Semitic. So obviously, when you're killing 2 people because they're Jews, or when you're attacking synagogues, or when you're burning, you're calling for the death of Jews, that's pure rabid anti-Semitism. It's bigotry. It's hatred of the worst order. But when you're critical of the Israeli government doing this or that action, that's not necessarily anti-Semitism. And I think we have to. There's a very fine line here, but it's too often crossed. The conflation of Jews and Israel doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. Nobody conflates all Muslims with bin Laden. And I'm not saying I'm perish the thought. I'm not saying that the current Israeli government or anyone, but I'm saying is even remotely even a pro side. Don't get me wrong on that one. My point is that conflating an outside society with something that's happening elsewhere in the world is bigotry, and that's why I wouldn't blame all Muslims for anything that's happening in which Muslims might be doing something wrong somewhere. In the same way that you shouldn't attack Jews for anything just because they're Jewish. And so I believe here that we have to be very careful and make that distinction. Clearly, the attack on the two Israeli staffers at the embassy was an anti-Semitic attack. And we see anti-Semitism raising its ugly head everywhere, in Europe, in the United States, in Australia, you name it, it's there. And I think that to blame Jews the world over because they dislike this action or that action by the Israeli government is disgraceful. But it should be the onus is on the governments in which these people live, because they are responsible. The governments are responsible for the safety of their own citizens: Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Catholic, Protestant. It doesn't matter what religion or what people they belong to, and that is where the onus lies. Here in Israel, we have our hands full so much with what's going on in the region, with the ongoing war, with the hostages, with the change in strategic issues in the Middle East, with economic issues that we have inside, with terrible coalition. And a majority of Israelis, or a great deal of Israelis, believe that this government doesn't really have any direction, not quite sure where it's going, and that everything seems to be in the circling around one thing and one thing alone: how to stay in power rather than how to lead us to somewhere a little bit different in the future. And the Palestinian people, we both need a new future.
Questions that this terrible murder in Washington, D.C. threw up is something that you alluded to, Ambassador. There's one side, of course, is the war in Gaza, and it has its own peculiarities. But there is also, for a long time, this propaganda that has happened among many countries about specific countries. And I feel this particularly strongly because I'm an Indian, because, in the past also we have seen that when this boycott and, attempts have been made of Israeli goods and services, that has sort of extended to other countries, notably including to India. There was an attempt because of, again, an issue that you mentioned, Kashmir. Now, tomorrow, already India has seen attacks on its diplomats in places like Canada, in the consulate burned down in San Francisco. And India is not alone. There could be other countries which might face similar sort of things. Are you worried, as somebody who studied geopolitics all his life and watched it carefully, are you worried that this kind of trend may spread? The kind of protest that we are seeing, especially on, involving very young people around the world who are often very easily swayed and perhaps don't always know the nuance. Do you think that this kind of violence, which is totally mindless and upon people who have nothing to do with anything, might happen, conflating things that are happening in a different part of the world on, the streets of Western countries?
Well, I can't say for certain that it won't happen, but I can talk, if I'm talking about the Israeli case, clearly we are held to a different standard than almost any other country in the world. The mega deaths that are going on in Sudan, the fighting in Africa, where hundreds of thousands, the Yemen war, the Syria war, nobody was complaining about those in any certain terms, and of course we're held to a very different standard. There is a possibility that might happen, because what you're saying is because at the end of the day, people are becoming, there are always radical, half-crazed extremists in almost any society. And so I can't say for certain it won't happen to Indians. I certainly hope it doesn't happen. But I was ambassador in India during the Mumbai attack in 2008. And we've seen later terrorist incidents. Clearly, people are attacking Indians for being Indian, because they don't like the policy in Kashmir, and you said as well, being abroad. We suffer more because these aren't just Israelis that are suffering abroad. In fact, not even at all Israelis, but they're Jews. So it's very different. It's a little bit different. However, again, for us here in Israel, our focus is in all the quagmire that we've been in since the 7th of October 2023. Where are we going? Where is Israel going? Where is the Arab world going? Where is the Palestinians going? Clearly, Hamas has ruled itself out as any type of position inside of Gaza. That's obvious. No Israeli government of whatever type would be able to accept any sort of Hamas presence in the ruling or military presence in Gaza. So we really have to find a different path, both us and the Arab world, and especially the Palestinians. But outside, I think what we saw during the last 2 years or almost 2 years of campuses around in the United States, in Columbia University, in Harvard, in Europe. It seems to us, even those who are not enamored with our current government, to use the understatement, these were pretty much orchestrated, paid for, brought into being by some sort, because of the messages were almost identical throughout the world. It was clearly some sort of orchestrated event. So we are suffering a great deal because we are who we are. We're just one Jewish country in the world, a small country of 10 million people. We don't have the international clout. We don't have 45 Jewish states or whatever. We're not part of the European groupings or Latin American or African or whatever, Asian. And the bottom line is that we are often by ourselves with the help of friends, India being one of them, the United States being another. But I do believe that we're not alone as a society. We're not alone as a people. We're not alone as Jews. We have friends in the same way that India has extremely many friends around the world. And certainly I wouldn't say that people are anti-Indian, certainly not here in Israel, not even in the slightest. The opposite is the case.
Let me ask you this, Ambassador. Do you think that, in a sense, one of the questions, and you alluded to this also, that worries a lot of people in the world is what comes next in Gaza? Now, as you said, the Hamas as an entity, as an idea, to wait for that to be wiped out is almost like chasing a mythical beast. But what could be assured, of course, is that there is no terror-linked activity in the geographical region. But the geographical region has been flattened. So do you have a sense of what comes next there? Could it spill over to other parts? What really comes next here?
Well, I tell you, as I said earlier, one of the issues we have is that the government isn't really discussing this. They're not discussing it because there's internal dissension within the government about what should happen next. And in order not to rock the boat, in order not to cause the government to fall, they're pushing it aside. They're kicking the can down the road. But clearly there has to be something done in Gaza in the post-war scenario, which has to include the rebuilding of Gaza, complete rebuilding of Gaza. It's the money itself isn't the issue. The issue is who will manage it, how Gaza will be demilitarized, who will rule it, which is crucial. Palestinian, pan-Arab, international, whatever. I personally believe it would be anathema. It would be terrible if Israel were to do so. But there are people even calling here, disgracefully in my mind, for Israel to go back in and rule Gaza. I think it would be one of the stupidest ideas imaginable, prolonging a war till, well, as you say, till kingdom come. But all of this needs to be discussed. Clearly, as you said, and as I said earlier, Hamas intervention in a future Gaza scenario is out of the question. It's proved what it is, a terrorist organization. It's like saying that let's put bin Laden into the Saudi government and have peace with them. It's idiotic and it won't happen. But what will happen and what needs to happen, it needs to be worked out between Israel, the Palestinians, and the Arab world and the international community. And there are solutions. There absolutely are solutions. And I don't believe that you can eradicate a radical ideology through use of weaponry.
I want to ask you, Ambassador, there was a hope in some quarters that the coming of the second coming, as it were, of Donald Trump, would lead to some sort of dramatic change. Now, that clearly has not happened, despite some proclamations and so on and so forth. Things are nothing really dramatic has changed on the ground. Would you say that expectations from the Trump, there were little expectations from the Biden government in terms of political move forward, but would you say that the expectations from the Trump 2.0, so to speak, government is also slowly beginning to, peter down, so to speak?
Well, I think the answer to your question lies in who held those expectations, because it is said that the higher the expectations, the greater the disappointment. I think those of us who are really studying the American political system, the Trump, right, thought of, despite the fact that he's very, very difficult to predict, he's a very unpredictable person, you could see certain aspects of what was important for him, what is his agenda, and how to fit into it. And to be honest with you, I think those who were very much great supporters of Trump here in Israel, yes, they are greatly disappointed. Because they are looking at an American president who they claimed was the greatest friend imaginable of the state of Israel. And I think he is a friend of Israel. I don't think we can put that aside, but the greatest friend imaginable. I think it's a little bit more complex than that. He looks at things in a strategic way, what's good for the United States, in his eyes. I'm not saying that it's good for the United States, but in his perception, what is good for the United States. And from there on, he looks at the Saudi possibilities of investment. He looks at Syria. He's speaking to Hamas, our biggest enemy. He's trying to get an agreement with Iran, which is the be-all and end-all of all evil in the Middle East, and the Iranian regime. Again, I stress that, and I stress that again, not the Iranian people, the Iranian regime. He's trying to find an agreement with them. I don't know whether he'll succeed or not. My guess is it's very difficult, if not impossible. But nonetheless, so the expectations that Trump would throw everybody to one side, the Saudis, the Iranians, and everybody to one side, the Syrians, and only focus on support for Israel. That expectation has been dashed. But I, and many like me, analysts, never held that expectation in the first place. And so it hasn't been dashed. And I think that what we're seeing now is something that more or less we could have foreseen at the time. And that even earlier, prior to him coming into election. So yes, I do believe that he is a friend to Israel, but if Israel doesn't join the agenda that he wants to project of ending the wars and bringing strategic change in the Middle East, be it in Ukraine or be it Russia, Ukraine, or be it in the Middle East, or be it anywhere, if Israel doesn't want to join the regional because the regional architecture, which he is trying to build up with the Saudis and the Gulf world, then he will put Israel a little bit on the back burner. He won't throw it down the drain. He won't push it under a bus, perish the thought. But it's not the same enormous strategic expectation that some had, not myself, as I said, but some had at the very beginning of this administration.
I actually want to ask you, Ambassador, that something seems to be shifting in the kind of Islamist extremism the world has seen in the last 15, 20 years. Now, up until really maybe 2014, 2015 or later, there was always this fear in many capitals around the world that there would be bomb blasts, there would be knifing incidents, there would be cars ramming into crowds, as we saw in many places, including in Europe. But many people, many analysts today fear that, in a sense, the strategy has changed. And as demographic changes happened in different parts of the Western world, there is more focus in the sort of broad Islamist ideology, you may want to call it the Muslim Brotherhood ideology or whatever you will, to essentially take over institutions. That institution capture is the new strategy in many parts. I of course can point out the so-called now notorious Muslim vote, so to speak, in the UK in the last elections, which was highly analyzed, highly criticized. In such a scenario, do you feel that every such subsequent quarrel, battle, fight that might occur that this kind of protest, this kind of overwhelming mobilization on the streets against Israel will become more and more vicious. Is that a worry that you feel that people are faced with?
Well. First of all, I know you mean it this way, but I would like to stress my point of view. One has to make an enormous distinction between Islamism and Islam. They are the two. I know you meant it. I'm not saying one didn't. I just would like to say it perhaps for myself rather than for anybody else. We're talking here about an extremist strand within a 2 billion or 1.8 billion population, and not and one must make that, and one must stress it each and every time in order not to make ourselves into any type of Islamophobia. But yes, we are allowed to be against Islamic extremism, and I think that the cultivated, the cultured Muslims around the world should be the first, and in many cases are the first to attack the extremism within their own midst, in the same way that we attack so many of our own. We've had a prime minister killed by an extremist, as a matter of fact, of the same ilk, Rabin. So, to your question, I think the answer is probably you do see a reaction already especially in Western Europe, to extremism, to Islamism, to Islamic extremism in Europe, by the fact that governments to a large extent and populations to a large extent are moving to the right. Anti-immigration is taking over in a number of countries of Europe. You see it even entering to government. I mean, who would have believed 20 years ago that Le Pen would be, at the top of the French political spectrum when they were running so lowly? Who would have believed 25 years ago that anti-immigration parties in the UK or in Holland would also be so strong? And yet that's where it is. So first of all, there is already a reaction to this. Second of all, I think that the answer lies in the long run over and above the policing, because one must have policing, one must force it back, one must is long-term education, is to try and inculcate the societies into the wider, broader Western values, or the values that we hold, the values that India holds, the values that are held of democracy, of freedom of speech, of freedom of thought. And not everything should be translated, if you disagree, into violence. And that happens among the extremes. It hasn't been successful in the UK. To a large extent, it hasn't been successful in France. But I think they have to try. We have to continue in the vein of greater education, of the importance of incorporating into the society. What you're seeing in the United States now, of course, is the repatriation. He's very, very strong on it, Trump, and that's actually part of the same reaction that I was talking about earlier. I'm not sure whether he's doing the right thing by taking it so strongly, but maybe that's where the world is going. So yes, you do see a rise in extremism because there are more numbers of extremists coming into countries which didn't formerly have populations with extremists of this nature in them. But you're also seeing a greater reaction to them. And I'm not quite sure always that the reaction doesn't sometimes foster some of the extremism. It has to be a very, very careful balance. I think the extreme right in Europe, in, say, Romania, as you see in, say, even the new president of Poland, etc., their approach is a very strident approach, is a very strong approach, and not necessarily an approach which will calm things down. From the Islamism point of view, they just need to change. It's a question of speaking in the mosques. It's a question of speaking in the schools. It's a question of education. It's a question of inculcation. And frankly, we haven't, or the West or civilized society hasn't found the way to do that yet.
First question is about India-Israel ties, Ambassador, and the point that I want to look at, of course, is when the attacks were happening with swarm drones, many of us sitting in India looked at those swarm drones attack Israel, and we looked with great awe at how the Israeli Iron Dome tackled many of these issues quite effectively. Now, we all wondered whether something like this would happen in India, and lo and behold, though sadly this indeed happened in India in the last, battle between India and Pakistan. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about, deeper defense ties between India and Israel. It's seeing that many of the issues that the two countries increasingly face and have faced in the past have great resonances. How do you see this relationship proceed in the future?
Well, can I give us a rather more lengthy answer? I remember when I was in India, I was asked to speak by different think tanks, universities, etc., around the country 75 times on the relationship between Israel and India. 75. And as we got to, and I counted them, as we got to the end, I asked actually one of the most important institutes in Delhi, and I said to them, what's so important? Why do I have to? When was the last time you asked the Swedish ambassador to talk about Sweden-Indian relations? Or the, I don't know, the Argentinian ambassador. These are countries which are bigger than us, and they also play a role. But there's a sort of a symbiotic feeling between Israel and India. And that feeling is actually mutual. And I'm very happy that it existed and it exists today, and it's stronger than ever. There are a number of reasons for that, which I won't go into now for time constraints. But then the other point was, and this one I always used to bring up, I hate to say this, but is that whenever one does give a talk, the first questions, or one of the first questions asked, is the defense relationship between Israel and India. Nobody asks about an even more important relationship between the two countries, which I would say is more important, is the agricultural relationship between the two countries. A country which has 600 million people living off the land. And we are very, very happy to be cooperating with India on something which is huge. And it has been going on with centers of excellence, horticulture, aquaculture, you name it. But that, of course, is not news. And then suddenly comes the defense, and that is the only issue. And I understand why, because the journalists, and that's what's more, I would say, attractive in the eyes of those who ask. And that's why I'm not decrying it. I'm just placing it in how I saw it. Having said that, I once got very, very criticized when I was in India. When I spoke to a journalist, and he asked me about the defense relationship, and he said, I said, I'm not allowed to talk about the defense relationship between Israel and India, but what I am allowed to say, what I will say, is that there is a defense relationship between Israel and India. That's all I said. I mean, it's a complete non-statement. And I was so severely criticized for going into details about, I didn't say a single thing, except there is a defense relationship. So, it's really not something that one wants to talk about. And somehow that's been grown in. Having said that, listen, obviously there's a defense relationship between us. It's no secret that there is, but the details of the defense relationship, the size of it, the depth of it, this is something that, even though I'm not part of the government today, it's become sort of involved in me. I think that Israel and India share common approach to so many issues. India's been faced terribly by terrorism. We see it day in and day out. It was worse. You had the Naxalite terrorism, you had the problems around your borders, of course, emanating from Pakistan. We live in a terrible area. I just wish our India would be our neighbor and not Hamas or the Hezbollah or Iran. But we're not. And I think, therefore, that when there are convergences of ideas and values, so there are obviously convergences of cooperation. It works together, and I think that it's an important concept that we have to keep on looking at. And we two countries which have a very close, perhaps not long historically, but in depth relationship between us. I always said to the Indian ambassador, he probably has the best job in the world. He is in a country in which everybody loves him. I haven't met a single person in Israel ever who has got even the slightest negative words to say about India, not even a thought of it, of that. And here he is sitting in the country which is so deeply loved. So I think that with that in mind, when I was in India, as I said earlier, I was in India at the time of the Mumbai attack in 2008. And I think that we know that from later discussion, that one of the reasons that they attacked the Jewish and the Israeli home in Kolaba in Mumbai was that they thought it would put a wedge between Israel and India in as far as defense cooperation was concerned, and that as a result of the fact that this wedge would drive us apart. I do believe, honestly, although I don't deal with it today, that the exact opposite happened. And it's this type of, and it showed the level of how we are in the same boat, that you are facing terrorism coming out of Pakistan, and they're also attacking Israelis and Jews inside of India. So clearly, there's other reasons also for this, but we're in this together. It's joint values, it's joint thoughts, it's joint feelings. We don't have to agree with everything that India does or says, and India certainly doesn't have to agree with everything that Israel says or does, by no means. But there is a depth, there's an inherent affinity in Israel towards India, and I felt it very strongly the other way around as well. And I think that that's to the good of both countries, really. And it's not a political prognosis. It's not a political analysis. It's an analysis of society. It's an analysis of people. So one can agree or disagree with Netanyahu. One can agree or disagree with Prime Minister Modi. But the Indians and the Israelis are further along the line than the actual political processes. And frankly, I think politically as well, we are aligned. But that's perhaps less important than societal approaches. So yes, there is a defense relationship, but more than that, I better not say anything. That's a long answer to a short question.
Ambassador Sofer, thanks very much, thanks very much for your time, and thanks so much for explaining these details to us. As always, very astute and insightful. You're a true friend of India, and as you say, India and Israel are two countries which have gone further down the path of friendship than perhaps many other two countries in the world. No doubt, as this goes along, we will have other opportunities to talk to you about the future of Gaza, the future of the India-Israel relationship. Thank you once again today for your time.
Thank you for having me, and whenever I'm called upon, I shall be here.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you so much.